Hi everyone. With our recently launched SwaggerHub Portal, we're really enabling teams to productize their APIs. So this gives you the ability to have rich documentation to accompany the technical reference definitions of your APIs, all aimed at improving the consumer developer experience and making it as easy as possible for your customers to adopt and integrate your APIs into their consumer experiences. Now, what does one of these API portals look like? Well, at SmartBear, we're also leveraging the SwaggerHub portal to document and describe our own product APIs. So over the coming weeks, you can expect to see many of our product APIs being published into our own SmartBear portal instance. And this is all allowing our customers to, as quickly as possible, integrate the capabilities of our products, how they see fit, into their current workflows. Now, if you start with your own portal, it might be empty and it might look something like this. Now, of course, you can use the management UI of the portal to configure it and to register your API products and add documentation. But for many teams, they will want to be able to automate this process. So our portal was built itself according to an API first principle. So everything that's possible through the UI is also possible through our SwaggerHub Portal APIs. And what I'm going to talk you through today is how can we leverage the SwaggerHub Portal APIs to actually configure and manage our own instance of a developer portal. So what we have here is we have all of the documentation and also the API technical reference implementation for the Portal API itself. So I'm not going to read through all of this, but what you will need to get started is a few prerequisites. So firstly, you will need to have a SwaggerHub account. That will need to be an enterprise license right now. The role of user that you will need to be either a designer or owner within that SwaggerHub organization in order to be able to invoke the APIs. And the SwaggerHub portal itself must be enabled for the organization. So once all of these are in place, then you're ready to start configuring your CI/CD pipelines or your own client applications and scripts to manage your portal instance. So from an authentication perspective, what you will need is you'll need your API key from SwaggerHub. And then what we're going to go through first is how can we manage some of the portal settings to make our empty developer portal look a little bit more welcoming. So looking at the manage portal settings, we have all of the information about the resources and the properties that can be configured. And what we need to do first is get the identifier for our portal instance. So we can do this by making a call to the portals API resource. So if we look at some of the documentation on this, we can also see that we can filter by the subdomain. So this will allow us to filter in on a specific organization or portal instance in case we have multiple access to multiple. So what we can do is I'm going to try out a call to this API directly from our Explore product. So just jumping over to Explore, and what we can do is I want to look for where the subdomain is Frank Commons. That's just the name of my SwaggerHub organization. And I will also need to supply it with the API key. So if I just jump back to the documentation momentarily, and in the authentication section, we see that we will be providing an authorization header with the value following bearer space and then our API key. So I'm just going to set that up. So I'm going to add a new HTTP header. It's going to be called authorization. And now I'm going to go to my SwaggerHub instance and I'm going to grab my API key. Paste in the value, hit the send, and here I get the ID of my portal instance, and I'm just going to store that off because I'll need that for future calls. Okay, so now that we have that information, we can continue to configure our base portal settings through the API itself. Now, uploading of branding and images, or sorry, the images themselves is not currently yet possible through the API. That will be coming very, very soon, but we can add the accent color that we want to use, the font that we want to use. We can also add that landing page description that everyone will see when they come and land on our portal. So I'm going to jump back to my API client, and I actually have some spaces created with the calls ready to go. So I'm going to send a patch request, and in the body of the patch request I have the name of my portal instance, the subdomain itself, whether or not it's going to be offline or online, the description that I want on the landing page, and then some branding information. So I'm setting the font name and the accent color. So if we remember, here's what my portal looks like currently, and now I'm going to issue this request. We can see that that came back with a 200 success, so that request was successful. Going to go to my portal, and I'm just going to refresh and see what's happened. So now we can see that the styling has changed here, and so we're getting the landing page message. We're also getting a different accent color that's indicated by this bar between the header and the main content section itself. So going back to the documentation, we can then see that this is how the portal will look like after making the API call, but I'm just going to add in the images manually, and for that I can jump into the UI of the portal itself. I can go into portal customization, and I'm going to upload a logo. And again, this will all be possible through the API very shortly. Favicon. Hero image. And an illustration image. And apply the changes. And if I refresh my portal now, we'll see the amalgamation of the manual changes that I made plus the changes through the API call. So now we have a portal that looks like this. Now the main reasons or use cases for administering the portal through the API itself, more often than not, will come to wanting to create products and manage product content. So as our API designs and definitions change, and or as other technical documentation that accompanies those change, if we're following, let's say, a design first approach, and maybe all of that information is persisted in a source control system like Git, and we will want to sync that information over to our portal or push that information into our portal once all checks and balances have been done. And we can do all of that through the API calls to the portal. So if I wanted to create a new product, again, this documentation just walks me through that process. So I need to send a post request to the product's endpoint, and this is an example of a call that I will make to the product's resource. And again, if I jump in to this endpoint itself, I will be able to see more of the specific schema information and see what properties are required and the descriptions for those properties, etc. Well, one of the reasons I stored off the portal ID in the earlier call is that I would have it now when I'm adding products. So again, I'm going to jump back to where I have some of these calls ready to go. So we're going to create a new product. So I'm setting the ID of the portal. I'm giving the product a name, a description, a slug for being able to access it directly from a unique URL, and whether or not it's public or hidden. Send that request. I'm going to get an ID of a product back. I'm going to just store that off because I will need that locally in order to be able to send documentation and additional content underneath that product. Now if I again look at what's here on the portal and I refresh, I can see that the product has indeed popped up and now it's part of my landing page. Again, I can't currently add a logo to the product itself, and that will be coming very shortly through the API. So I'm just going to jump back into the management pane again. I'm going to just show you how you can add an image or a logo to a product. So here we can see the Pet Adoptions API has been created. I can look at the settings for that and I can upload a logo, and I'm just going to update or apply this placeholder logo for now. Apply the changes, confirm, and refresh my portal. And now we can see that we have a Pet Adoptions product here, which is rendered on the homepage of my developer portal. It has a logo, it has some descriptions. If I jump into this product, we can see it's empty. So it doesn't have any content yet. So the next thing that we're going to go through is adding APIs and documents to a product. So this is really the meat and drink for what our portal is all about. So looking at the calls that we need to make here, there's basically three things that we need to do. We need to create a section. So this is just a placeholder that or a resource that will store different forms of content. So that will either be an API definition, so like an open API file or an async API file, or it will be a markdown document, and this is additional documentation that can accompany those technical reference implementations. So the first thing that we're going to do is add a section. So we're going to send a post request to the sections endpoint. Again, I can drill in here to see more information on the specific resource and all of the properties that are required to be sent. I'm going to just jump back to my client where I have this ready to go. So within my sections here, I have a post request ready to send, but I just need to paste in the specific product ID for the product that we've just created. Hit send, and now I have a section. I'm just going to store off the section ID because again I'm going to need that for future calls. So that section has been created. So the next step that we want to do is add an actual API. So we've created a product, and what APIs are going to be part of this product itself. So we're going to send a post request to the section that we've just created and a sub resource of that section, which is called table of contents. So this is just filling out the left-hand pane underneath the product that will act as basically the table of contents for all related documentation for this product. So I'm going to send a post request to the table of contents endpoint, and I'm just going to replace the section with the section identifier that I've received from my previous request. And here I'm sending the title of the section, again the slug so that it's addressable, and the content. And for this content I'm specifying that it's going to be a reference to a open API definition that I have available in SwaggerHub. Send this request and I get that information back, which is great. So that section has been created. Now I'm going to start adding some additional documentation. So I'm going to start adding some markdown documentation to accompany the technical reference information that we have put there. And again, you know, this is a very real world scenario. Often we'll have API documents or definitions according to the open API specification as an example. But we will also accompany that technical information with maybe some easier to follow guides for the developers who are going to go through the process of consuming and using that API. So again, I'm going to make another request to the sections resource, the specific section and the table of contents resource that's underneath that. And instead of sending a API reference link This time the content is going to be of type Markdown. So again, I have that request ready to go here. So again, I need to replace the section with the section ID that we've just created a little bit earlier. And again, the title of the content that I'm going to create is a Getting Started guide. And this is a Getting Started guide for the Pets and Adoptions API that we've just linked in the previous step. Now the response for this is going to give me a document ID. And again, this is a placeholder document where I'm then going to add the Markdown content to. So I'm just going to store off that document ID because I will need that in my next step. And the next step, if we follow the guide, is adding some Markdown content to the document ID reference that we've just created. And here's a sample request for this, and I have one here in my API client ready to go, just underneath this documents placeholder. And again, I just need to replace the document ID with the document ID that I've just created, and I'm sending a patch request, and I'm going to update the content of that document with all of this Markdown information that I have here. I'm going to send that request. And that's great, that was successful. So I'm getting a 200 back. So now I've added the reference, technical reference to the API, so that link to the Open API definition. I've also added a additional document which is Markdown, and I've added Markdown content into that document. And the very last thing that I need to do is then publish the content to make it available on my portal. So I'm going to make a put request to the product, and I'm going to update all of the published content, if there was any already there, with the new content that I have been editing and adding to the various sections and table of contents underneath that product itself. So again, jumping back into my client, and I have a call already in SwaggerHub Explore here, ready to send to that product to publish the product. I just need to grab the product ID. Again, just to make sure that I publish the right product ID. Okay, so that was successful, and I'm getting a 200 back and no warnings or anything that I need to be aware of. So that means the content for the Pets and Adoptions product has been published. So if I go back into my own portal and I refresh, we can see that we now have a Getting Started guide explaining how to get up and running with the new Pet and Adoptions API. And we also have the API reference documentation as well. So all of these have been added through the API calls, which is very useful. And as I said, it's possible to do all of this through the user interface, but in many situations, especially if we have multiple teams who are going to be responsible for different products, it can be very, very useful for us to be able to automate the publishing of the API definitions as well as the supporting documentation directly to the portal without having to rely on manual processes. So the guides that are here for our SwaggerHub Portal API take you through that exact process as I have shown. Also talks about how to manage existing products if there's products already there. And we're also maintaining a nice API changelog. And again, this is just stored as Markdown content, and we can update this changelog as we're also making changes to the documents or the technical reference implementation as well. And again, when you make all of these changes, then you will have a portal that has gone from pure white label into something that is customized based on your own needs, has all of the products that you have available, and again publishes all of the content within those products as you see fit. So I think this is a very useful use case as to how we're kind of interacting with the portal, the SwaggerHub Portal product through its APIs ourselves to self-serve many of the SmartBear teams who will be publishing their product API information into our SmartBear portal instance. So that's it. Thank you very much, everyone. Hopefully you found this useful.